Hello, and welcome to the first program of the 2019 Vizient Performance Management Leadership Series. Today we're going to look at developing leadership resilience, why building skills to increase resilience in daily life is important in enabling leaders to give their best to those they serve, support, and lead. I'm Julie Cerise. I'm the Group Senior Vice President of Performance Management and National Networks at Vizient. And over the past couple of years, through Vizient's Joy in the Workplace Collaborative, we've seen participants find new meaning in their work and their own lives, with changes that have transformed their organization at all levels. During the course of this collaborative, we've seen the need for leaders to focus on themselves and to develop approaches and attitudes that improve their outlook, that help them be the best for themselves and their organization. In that vein, we're going to focus on these concepts. And first, we're going to be discussing the rationale and importance of leaders understanding and cultivating their own resilience. We're going to be summarizing the 7 habits for creating a remarkable life and help you identify one change that you can initiate tomorrow for your organization that can help build resilience. So during the program, please follow along using the supplemental handout. The most current version is posted online. And also toward the end of our discussion today, you're going to have a chance to join in. Just send us your questions or comments at any time by typing your message in the question box and clicking submit. We have a lot to cover in this short hour. So to get started, let me introduce our distinguished panel. So let's begin with Greg Hebert. Greg, briefly tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Julie. It's a joy to be here. I've spent over 35 years practicing, studying, and teaching and coaching leadership. My father, as all as my 5 siblings, all spent time in the military. And I went on to West Point and graduated from there in 1981. I spent approximately 6.5 years with the 82nd Airborne Division as an infantry officer, and the Army selected me to teach leadership at West Point for several years. One of the more interesting assignments after I left the Army, in addition to working at McKinsey & Company, I worked for an international executive search firm by the name of Aegon Zender, where for 3 years I conducted over 50 C-level searches for Fortune 100 clients. In 2002, I started my own leadership development company. And since then, I've had the privilege of working with thousands of executives and teams in helping them improve the quality of their leadership. Such things as leadership assessment, curriculum and executive education, rapid cycle improvement, and organizational and cultural change.
So thanks so much for joining us today, Greg. We're really glad you're with us. We also welcome Dwight McBee. And Dwight, why don't you give us a brief review of your background and your current roles and responsibilities?
Well, Julie, I'm excited to be here. My name's Dwight McBee. I have a background in nursing, and I've held various leadership roles over the past 17 years. My current role is the Chief Experience Officer for Temple University Health System, and in that role, I focus on patient experience strategy and set the strategic direction for the organization. So I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Dwight. We're really glad to have you as well. And finally, we welcome Allison Saccomondi. And Allison, tell us a little bit about you.
So thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to be here as well. I'm the Director of Leadership and Organizational Development and Engagement at Temple University Health System, and I'm responsible for the learning strategy across the organization. I have a long background in human resources of about 25 years and worked in a variety of industries, but for the last 8 years, I've been focused specifically on healthcare and leadership development. It's my passion.
So thank you so much, Allison. We're really glad to have both of you with us today, as well as Greg. So Greg, when we began our Joy in the Workplace project here at Vizient, we saw that leaders, in order for leaders to succeed, they needed to take on aspects of what we term resilience. So from your perspective, why is there such a need for resilience in healthcare today?
Yeah, Julie, for those who work in healthcare, we feel like we're in great personal, organizational, cultural storms. Many of these environments are characterized by high volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and great ambiguity. Consistent messages of overload, overwork, and do more with less, with information and systems overload, always having to be on, many competing priorities with a vicious downward spiral that often leads to greater anxiety, helplessness, cynicism, and frustration. And even beyond healthcare, Julie, society is not doing well. Our depression rates in America today are 12 times higher than they were in 1960. In a recent study of college students across the nation, 52% of them reported having strong feelings of hopelessness, and 39% said they suffer from such severe depression they almost found it difficult to function at some point during the previous year. 1/3 of Americans in a Cigna 2017 study reported chronic loneliness. And as David Brooks in The New Yorker said, America is suffering from a crisis of connection. 50 years ago, the average age of depression was close to 30. Today, it's 14 and a half. So we as a society are not doing well. And everything we know about health and well-being, we're not practicing. So we don't have a knowing problem, we have a doing problem and a being problem. And I believe resilience is an antidote to some of these many challenging issues.
So Greg, thanks so much for framing the current state. And those are some really powerful statistics about the impact of resilience. You know, Dwight, I'm interested in hearing from you about some of the challenges your leaders face and have to navigate on a day-to-day basis.
Sure, Julie. So working at Temple University Hospital, which by the way has 732 beds, we're a level 1 trauma center. We have over 27,000 inpatient admissions every year. We have over 3,000 outpatient visits every year. We have about 5,000 employees, and the daily operations themselves are challenging. But the real story is in the external environment. 86% of the patients that come to Temple are on some form of government insurance. 30% of our patients are below the federal poverty level. 62% of those patients have no high school diploma. And Philadelphia leads the 10 largest cities in homicides per capita. We have many socioeconomic challenges like food insecurity and homelessness, and we were struck particularly hard by the opioid crisis. And all of these challenges sort of add more to the leadership's plate when they're dealing with resilience.
You know, I'm so glad that you described those environmental challenges, and I'm sure that as our viewers are listening, those all resonate with them because many of them are faced with similar challenges. But in the midst of these environmental challenges, which are very real, you know, what problems do you commonly find among your leaders?
So our leaders, for the most part, do a great job, but there are times where our leaders are unable to demonstrate empathy and compassion during crucial times. Times like family meetings when we gather their families together and we have to make a decision. Demonstrating empathy is critically important, and sometimes we're lacking there. There are times where we're unwilling as leaders to address difficult and long-standing issues that exist in our departments. There are times where there's an inability to verbally de-escalate a situation that's gone out of control. And there are times where we permit unacceptable behavior, such as poor staff attitude. And what we've noticed in the past is that there was a growing disconnect between our management team and our frontline staff.
Yeah, so these anecdotes are incredibly helpful, and you know, stories help us really, you know, make these things tangible and bring them to life. But I'm curious as to whether you have some data, you know, that supports the perspective you've shared.
Sure, we took a look at our survey data. We looked at our culture of safety survey, and what we looked at was our improvements. We actually saw some improvements from our first survey in 2015 to our most recent survey in 2017. And what we saw were that in the area of teamwork climate and safety climate, we were below the national standard. Then when we took a deeper dive into the teamwork climate, what we noticed was that our management team performed at or above the national standards, but our frontline staff and our nurses were performing below that national standard. Then we looked at our safety climate. In our safety climate, we saw those themes continue. The safety climate for our frontline staff was below the national standard. And we know that when we try to improve the patient experience, that is ultimately linked to our employee experience. And all of that depends on the resilience of our management team.
Right. So make the connection between the management and the staff. How did this affect your staff, Allison?
So I think we all know when it comes to employee engagement that it can have a serious impact on your organization when engagement is lower. And so we really want to focus on that and make sure that you're getting the most out of your employee engagement. Some of the things that we see oftentimes is a higher absenteeism rate, and that ultimately can lead to lower turnover. We've seen lower customer satisfaction in areas where they have lower engagement, and all of those factors, I think, can impact overall productivity for any organization. So you want to make sure that you address them.
Allison and Dwight, thank you for painting the picture of the challenges you're facing in your organization, and I think we know the challenges really abound. So Greg, lead us off here. What can we do to address the issues?
Yes, Julie, all this bad news has truly awakened many healthcare organizations as leaders have made improving provider and staff and caregiver wellness a key and critical strategic objective, just like Temple. We don't wish struggle on anyone. Yet the nature of the human condition is that we lose loved ones. We get sick. Stock markets rise and fall. People we love experience depression. Storms come and go, fires, floods. Even Jeff Bezos isn't immune to relationship trials. So developing resilience is a key enabler to help maintain and sustain our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. And resilience deepens our ability to take on even harder things in our future. And the research in science is compelling and tells us that it can be taught, developed, and cultivated.
So Greg, clearly resilience can impact our lives, but before we go any further, define it for us. What do you mean by the term resilience?
Yes, Julie, resilience is the ability to grow and thrive in the face of challenges. And even more importantly, to be able to bounce back from adversity and flourish, not only in the face of, but perhaps because of the challenges that we've experienced. And in this way, resilience feels what's missing and built through a set of core competencies that can help us enable certainly mental toughness, optimal performance, greater and stronger leadership, and certainly more goal and success achievement. And resilience helps us develop better inoculation and protection against those life experiences that can otherwise be overwhelming. Helps us more balance in our lives during difficult times. And what we've been learning is it reduces the risk-taking behaviors of excessive drinking and smoking and taking of illicit drugs, but also increases our involvement in community or family activities and lowers the rate of mortality while increasing physical health and well-being. Hemingway said these beautiful words, "We all get broken in life." And I believe that resiliency helps some of us grow stronger in those broken places.
So, you know, I love the words inoculate and protect. They really resonate with me, and I'm hopeful that we can continue the conversation about how individuals take those words and bring them to life in their own world. But tell us a little bit more about you, Greg. What triggered this interest in this topic? How did it begin for you?
Thank you for asking. When I was a young 19-year-old at West Point, in their infinite wisdom, they made a terrible mistake and sent me to the Naval Academy as an exchange cadet in 1979, where I spent a semester there. And what was amazing is I got to encounter several senior naval officers who had been pilots in Vietnam. They had been shot down and shared with me and many others how they had suffered years of torture, degradation, and malnourishment as POWs. And yet, despite the difficult circumstances, what these men shared was that their captivity was a period of immense growth and was this springboard to even having a more remarkable, highly productive life after the release. And what's amazing about these former POWs is that less than 4% of them have suffered post-traumatic stress disorder, where we know that well over 30% of Vietnam veterans suffer from PTSD. So what happened in the lives of these former POWs that made them so different and that contributed to them having remarkable lives? Well, there's a term coined by two professors from UNC by the name of Professor Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, who called this concept post-traumatic growth. That what their research has shown us is that human beings challenged by extremely difficult challenges sometimes in radical ways can come out of those experiences profoundly changed in a more positive way. Certainly the concept is not new. The theme comes at us in many ancient spiritual and religious traditions. But what is new is the systematic study of this phenomenon by psychologists, social workers, scholars, counselors, and in other traditions of clinical practice and scientific investigation.
So in the average person, let's take the average person, where would we see or how would we see post-traumatic growth exhibited?
Yeah, Julie, it tends to occur in 5 general areas but often comes about because a person has gone through a major life crisis, a loss of a loved one, developing a chronic illness, overcoming some significant time of depression and struggle. And what the research is showing us around post-traumatic growth is that when we go through these and we find opportunities to see these as possibilities for growth, that there's 5 major outcomes that happen. The first is that we emerge from the struggle and see now new possibilities that perhaps we didn't imagine or envision before. But certainly it changes our relationship with others, and we develop greater empathy for those who suffer. And what we've found is it also increases a sense of one's own strength, that this notion that if I lived through that terrible experience, I can live through anything. But fourth is we develop a greater appreciation of life in general, that we don't let the little things, get us into a difficult negative spot. And the fifth outcome is that we see significant changes in people's belief systems as they deepen their spiritual life. And so what I found as a 19-year-old young man was that these POWs had such wisdom and enlightenment that was uncommon and inspiring. And I said to myself back then, I didn't want to have to go through what they did to achieve the same level of growth, strength, and wisdom. And what we've come to find out in studying these former POWs, that there are practices and tools and habits that can help strengthen resilience and build this term post-traumatic growth. And I believe so profoundly that we can and we must apply these tools and practices and habits to helping caregivers and providers stay healthy and happy in serving patients and communities.
So Greg, are there some misunderstandings or mistaken ideas out there about what resilience is?
Yeah, that's a great question. To fully appreciate what resilience is, we've got to understand what it's not. And the pioneer in this work is a great professor by the name of Dr. Martin Seligman, also from Philadelphia, teaches at the University of Pennsylvania. And about 40 years ago, he had this idea that we could further psychology not by continuing to study broken and abnormal people, but maybe we should study those who are frequently happy and joyful and optimistic. And it created this great renaissance in psychology. And about 10 years ago, the Army adopted his positive psychology philosophy. And over the course of these 10 years, they've trained over 1 million soldiers, and they have over 55,000 master resilience trainers. And the Army felt there was just a great need to be able to separate myth from fact as they started training these soldiers and these master resilience trainers. And one of the myths was that you never show emotion. And the fact is you have to learn how to regulate and manage that emotion. The myth of focusing on the individual. The fact is you've got to focus and build support for the individual and their connection and relationships with their families and their comrades and their communities. The myth of equipping the soldier to handle everything on his or her own. But the fact is we've got to provide them the tools and the confidence to be able to ask for help and show vulnerability. There's this myth of always having to act fast and demonstrate superhuman feats. But the fact is, we've got to have the insight to know when to modulate performance and slow down, to include rest and recovery, and even do such a thing as take your vacation. The myth is either you have it or you don't. And the fact is everyone can learn it and develop it. And it's not a destination. Indeed, it's a process and a journey.
So from your experience, Greg, what gets in the way? What keeps leaders from achieving resilience in their lives?
Yeah, Julie, I've found that there have been 4 major barriers when I work with clients and organizations. The first is that we too often rely on this thing called willpower. And so I often refer to it, willpower is not on will call. And so if you've had a long, stressful week, your willpower at Friday afternoon is not the same as it is on Tuesday morning. And so we've got to build in habits that can be sustained when our willpower will fail us. The second barrier is what I call a negativity bias. We forget that the human brain that we have, this amazing human brain, is the same brain that walked the earth 200,000 years ago. And how deeply wired into our DNA is this bias to hunt for the negative, because that's how you stayed alive. But that negativity bias bleeds into constantly being pessimistic And we know now that that's a huge barrier to being able to embody resilience. The third barrier is confusing time for energy management. You and I can't create more time in our lives, but if we are thoughtful and careful about how we build our resilience, we can produce so much more energy for others. And so this distinction of time versus energy management. And the fourth barrier I see is confusing too often and spending too much time on those things that are urgent and unimportant, that creates this barrier to getting what's most important. And I believe building resilience has to be one of the most important priorities for leaders today.
So Allison, you've got years of experience in the care delivery setting, and we'd like to hear what attitudes you've seen that might get in the way.
Yeah, so I think that Greg is making some great points, and whether it's in our organization or in your organization, we see leaders really being reactionary in a lot of ways. They go out there and they're putting out the fire, the most important thing that has to happen each day. And let's face it, it's these types of skills like resilience, right, that we really need to be able to put into practice. And so, like exercise, we have to make that conscious effort to practice in order to see results. So at the end of the day, if we don't use it, we lose it.
You know, this whole discussion, Allison and Greg, about resiliency and post-traumatic growth, which is a new concept, really reminds me of my own journey through various leadership roles. And I recall just struggling to balance work and life. And I didn't even realize I needed to focus on my own resiliency. It actually took a major crisis in my life. My daughter, at 1.5 years, was diagnosed with a condition called Rett syndrome, which is primarily a disorder that affects girls, but it renders them disabled. And for me, it sort of caused me to reevaluate my entire work-life balance. And I began to change the way that I lived my life. I actually spent more time focusing on my faith. It drew me back to my faith beliefs. And that's where I found a mentor in my pastor who actually is a nurse and a former administrator, and really helped me see all of my challenges in a new way. And I stopped seeing my challenges as these obstacles in my life, and I began to see them as opportunities. And once you begin to change your perspective in that way, you'll never see a challenge again in your life. You'll only see opportunities.
So Dwight, I so appreciate you sharing that personal story, and it reminds us all that this is personal. It's about us as individuals. And I'm just going to take a moment to talk to our viewers to say, you know, this program is unique and different because the strategies that we're hearing about relate to you. It relates to you, the audience, as leaders in your organization, which is sometimes different from how we've done programs in the past, where we're sharing something with our audience, where we're expecting them to share it with others. But this is about those leaders who are with us today. So Greg, help us. Help us tell the leaders how do they manage these challenges for themselves and balance their own personal and professional work resilience.
Yeah. Julie, I have a phrase that I've been using for many years with a lot of my clients called "you can't give what you don't have." So I think it begins with leaders recognizing that for them to be their best for those they lead, serve, support, and love, they need to build resilience capability within themselves. Secondarily, as Allison shared, you have to create these habits. No one builds resilience by reading a book or going to a class, but you create them day by day, habit by habit, week by week. And when you have that resilience experience and confidence, it does indeed provide you much deeper protection and inoculation against the experiences that can be often overwhelming. I often ask people to think about this metaphor of a tennis ball or a broken egg. And my question is, do you want to be the tennis ball that bounces or the broken egg? So resilience is about indeed creating more balance in our lives to be able to endure and perhaps even grow stronger in those difficult or stressful times. And when you build resilience, one of the most important things that I have found is you build this reservoir within you that says, I can do hard things.
So thinking about all the competencies that are needed, can you dial in a couple for us? What specifically can we focus on?
Yeah, I think two of the most important foundational resilience competencies are the competency of self-awareness and regulation. In the Jewish scriptures, the Talmud, There's this beautiful quote that says, "We don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are." And when our emotions are triggered by fight or flight, protect or defend, we can get lazy. We can lose our capacity to see things clearly and to be able to think well and view other possibilities or other points of view. So the competency of self-awareness is the ability to recognize patterns and those hot buttons that may trigger a less than optimal response. And self-regulation is about being able to see and choose a much better path, a more positive and constructive response. And just as it's foundational to resilience, we know that it's also foundational to emotional intelligence, which I believe is one of the most important attributes of highly effective leaders.
So Greg, give me a second. I'm going to try to summarize what I think you've said. We can waste a lot of time and effort responding impulsively or negatively, when if we would just wait a beat, let the emotion inside subside, we might be better off. Do I have it right?
Exactly. That's truly resilience at work, and its best. Viktor Frankl wrote an amazing book. He was a Holocaust survivor, and his book that he wrote in the 20th century was called Man's Search for Meaning. And he gave us these profound words that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies the freedom to choose. And in that freedom to choose lies our power. Think about how often we break relationships with friends, spouses, and team members by speaking out of anger, contempt, or judgment. But if we can just see the space between the stimulus, some activating event, words said, and work to be more thoughtful in our response, the capacity we have to get completely different, much better outcomes is there for us. And when we face difficult things, if we can better manage our thinking, those difficult things may be indeed our opportunities for greater growth, development, and certainly success. And I believe that's at the heart of personal resilience.
So, Greg, I think you're so right about that. In fact, these skills for personal resilience, the way we've tried to support it in our workplace is through providing our leaders with the tools they need to really navigate the workplace each day. And to me, it seems like there's really two key items. One is experience, and the second is confidence. And so we've tried to implement these specific strategies to provide leaders with the tools and skills that they need. And what we've seen when we take a step back is that our leaders have gained the confidence that they need. They've built these relationships across our organization. They've increased their emotional intelligence, and overall, they've become more resilient as a result. So we've been very intentional about our strategy. And so we implemented this two-pronged strategy almost 4 years ago. The first part of the strategy focused on engagement, and the second part of the strategy really focused on leader development. And so when you take a look at what we put into place from an engagement perspective, we put this regular cadence of surveys into place where we made sure that we were getting regular feedback. And we drove that data all the way down to frontline leadership instead of keeping it just at the top of the organization. And what this did was really, it opened up this communication between the leader and the team. And it created purposeful two-way communication. And leaders were committed to really making improvement. And not only committed to the improvement, but writing it down in written action plans. And it was really exciting to see, and it made a big difference. The second thing that we did was we brought learning to the team at the team level, bringing learning to where people work. And what that did was it created this cohesiveness in our units and a common language for them to communicate and motivate each other in the environment that they're working in each and every day. Besides that, we had these foundational programs that were really great. So from a civil treatment standpoint, we had training for everyone on what type of environment do we want to create from a respect standpoint. And then we brought together people around skills that our mid and executive levels leaders needed in terms of things like decision making, communication, self-awareness, and team building. Those are all the skills that we think are vital today in our healthcare environment.
So that's a really nice and incredibly comprehensive program. And as you've implemented these strategies, how have you seen leadership roles transformed?
So one of the things that we try and do at Temple is to make sure that whatever we're training people on, that they can take those skills and the very next day implement them. Why? Because they want to see immediate results. Instead of having a great day in training, they need to be able to take it and put it into service. And so that builds confidence when they see something work right away. That confidence builds resiliency, and that drives leadership, and that drives teamwork.
Really helpful information. So going back to Greg, you've been studying this for the past 20 years, and I'm curious, what has your study taught you about the most important habits for deepening resilience?
Yeah, as what I've found, Julie, is that one of the most important things that neuroscientists are telling us is we have an opportunity by building habits around practices that create this upward spiral, as the diagram states. And I have found that there are 7 practices and habits that have the most impact on creating that upward spiral. So the 7 are, first, living with purpose and meaning. The second, being able to cultivate positive emotions. Third, deepening our social bonds with others. 4, reflecting and expressing gratitude and appreciation. 5, being able to promote hope and optimism. 6, being mindful. And 7, get moving. I'd put exercise, but I just love that this is about creating an upward spiral, so there is a notion of get moving on the other habits as well.
So we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into each of these, and I'd love to hear from our colleagues at Temple about how they've put some of these habits into place.
Yeah, let me begin with what I think is one of the most important habits, foundational to a remarkable life, which is being able to live with purpose and meaning. And when I engage people around this habit, I challenge them to stay connected to one sense of purpose and reason for being at many points in any given hard day. And I challenge them to find when they are most alive and excited and passionate, asking them a big question of, what is your big and mighty why to get up every day for? And having a clear articulation of what's the legacy you're going to leave behind when you've left this planet. And I believe at the heart of this habit is having a true north that keeps you directed even in the midst of life's storms and calamities. I think of this beautiful statue that I got to visit in Milan, Italy some years back. It's called the Rondinini Pieta. And it's of Mary holding Jesus off the cross. And it's a statue in a museum all by itself. And the faces of Mary and Jesus are exquisite. But when you get close to the statue, you realize it's not finished. And it's not finished because the artist and sculptor Michelangelo was carving away at this statue 2 days before he died. And what I love about this story is that he died at the age of 88 in the year 1564, where the average age of an Italian male was less than 30. So this man lived almost 3 times as long as his peers. And I think he lived that long because he had this mighty passion, this clear purpose of wanting to bring this sculpture into being that kept him getting up each and every day with energy and desire and passion.
Greg, that's a wonderful story and a powerful story about how connection to purpose can really drive someone to a higher level of performance. And what we've done at Temple and what you can do as well is we've taken a practical approach. We've actually taken stories and used them purposefully to connect our workforce to their purpose. And we do this on a routine basis. We actually have a quarterly story slam, and that's where we invite doctors, we invite nurses and support staff, and we invite them to tell their story, talk about your experience, and that has a powerful effect of connecting people back to their purpose. And so we try to find as many opportunities as we can to weave storytelling into the organization, and I think it's had a profound impact, and you can have that same impact in your organization as well.
Yeah, and the other thing that we've done as well is we've really looked to find ways to celebrate success. And when you look at what we've done with engagement, we celebrate those stories, we publish those stories, we get them out across the health system, not just about what the end result was, but how did they identify the problem? How did they overcome the challenge? And ultimately, how did they increase engagement across the organization so everyone can celebrate the success?
That's beautiful. Both of you are really pointing to the second habit of being able to cultivate more positive emotions in our lives. And oftentimes I'll challenge people to just do something as simple each day of reflecting on at least 3 to 5 positive experiences as I shared earlier, that we're so hardwired to hunt for the negative and the bad. So this is about hunting for the good, of finding the happy days and remembering the happy life events and attempting to replay them in one's mind to prolong and reinforce positive emotions. I keep a savoring album that allows me to take a picture of something of great beauty and to write a short description that I can go back to when I'm feeling down or when I'm feeling discouraged or overwhelmed by things. Just pulling out that memory, that savoring album, can bring me back to a place of joy and positivity. In a recent study by the Alternative Board, they suggest cultivating positive emotions can have a huge increase in perceptions of leadership effectiveness. Hundreds of entrepreneurs across the world were given a survey, and they identified positivity as what made leaders most effective. And positivity beat out passion, decisiveness, and personableness, among others.
You know, Greg, I really love that because it's simple. And we know in healthcare it can be very hectic, and you know, simplicity is the mother of compliance. If you want someone to do something, make it simple, right? And so what we did at Temple is we asked our leaders find one thing to compliment someone on each day. And what they did is they began to hunt for the good. And when you go out and when you tell your leaders to go compliment someone, they begin to see all the things, all the great things that are happening around them that would otherwise have gone unnoticed.
Wow. And that really points us into the third habit, because when you compliment another human being, you're making this human connection. So the third habit is deepening our social bonds with others. And when we nurture relationships, we connect with others who have played an important part of our life. But one of the things I challenge people is to learn how to have the courage to be vulnerable, to open yourself up to the support and help and insight of others. And when you do, connections are made. But another way to make great connections and bonds is through our simple acts of kindness. When we extend an act of random or intentional kindness to others, it opens us up. As Leo Tolstoy said, nothing can make our life or the lives of other people more beautiful than perpetual kindness. I often cite the Harvard study of adult development that looked at 724 young men beginning in 1938 to the present. And one of the amazing findings of looking at human life for this long, it's not fame or fortune or education or what part of the tracks you were born on. The thing that contributed most to people reflecting on their life as having a remarkable life is the capacity to build deep, intimate relationships. I often ask clients to consider this very simple way of framing successful, effective relationships through the HAVE model, where H stands for humility, A stands for acceptance, V stands for vulnerability, and E stands for empathy.
You know, that's a really nice and practical framework. Greg, thanks. Tell us a little bit more about how social bonds help us beyond boosting resilience.
Yeah, Julie, what's unbelievable is the research that confirms that by building deep bonds with others, it greatly affects our health in the most positive ways. The more friends and the more love in your life, the less illness. Lonely people are markedly less healthy than sociable people, and happy people certainly have much richer social networks than the unhappy. What we've found is that social connectedness contributes to a lack of disability as we age. Misery may love company, but company certainly does not love misery, and the ensuing loneliness of pessimists may be a path to greater illness. I'd like to talk about the fourth habit, which is reflecting and expressing gratitude. It may be the most simple to perform, but it can be profound in what it can do to our whole attitude and joy and resilience in life. And it's something as simple as writing down 3 to 5 things in a gratitude journal. I have a wonderful app called Gratitude 365, where I have made at least 3 entries a day for well over 3 years. And just by going through this habit, it just raises my sense of well-being and positivity and joy in life. And it's something as simple as being able to think of someone whom you owe a debt of gratitude to and expressing your appreciation in concrete terms, written or even more profoundly, face-to-face.
You know, Greg, everything you're saying it sounds so wonderful, and what I keep hearing is be intentional, you know. And at Temple, you know, what we realized is that we're really intentional about some of the wrong things. Some of those habits that we formed actually are destroying those social bonds that we want to build up. We actively manage down our coworkers and other leaders. And so what we've done is we've turned that around and you said, you know what, make a habit of managing up. And what that looks like is if I were to introduce Greg to a group of my employees, I'd say, you know what, I want you to meet Greg. He's terrific. I can't wait for you to hear what he's about to say. He's wonderful. And what that does is it positions Greg for success, and it's actively endorsing him. And we don't do enough of that.
You know, that's a real nice, concrete pearl that everyone can walk away with today. Greg, I think we can all say that at one time or another we've felt that we've been trapped in a pattern of reacting negatively to what's happening to us. And so far you've told us about 4 habits that can turn toward the positive so that we're moving outward toward showing others a positive attitude. So how do the next 3 habits build on that?
Thank you, Julie. The 5th habit is profoundly important. It's about promoting hope and optimism. And it may be the most cognitively dense of the 7, but when mastered, may be the most powerful. There's this old quote I remember, even at a young age, that what the mind could conceive and believe, the human being could achieve. And that some of the most successful people in the world are the ones who are able to clearly envision the future state they desire to create. And the more clear and the more vivid that future state, the more that even their subconscious was trained to pursue and persevere and achieve greater success. So here's how you get started in this habit. Just begin with envisioning your best possible self. Pick a time frame, a year, 5 years, 10 years. Reflect and write down what you expect your life to be in very vivid terms a few years from now. And see it, feel it, think it, dream it. And if you don't want to take a long horizon, imagine what a great day looks for you tomorrow. Say you've got a critical meeting with your boss or your team, and describe the outcome. Describe how you want people to feel and what you want them to experience. And describe it vividly in small chunks of time. And see you and your team members as happy, enthusiastic, positive, and resilient.
You know, I love this concept of hope. And at Temple, you know, like any organization, you have your core values. At our organization, our core values are respect, service, and quality. And we try and live those values each and every day. But there's this other motto that we have that we don't always publicize, and it's called heal people, save lives, dispense hope. And I think that hope is what drives us really when we're saying, you know, that we're going to commit to working into healthcare.
Yeah, I love that, Allison. Thank you. The 6th habit is about being more mindful. And too often times when people hear that mindful, they go right to meditation. And certainly meditation is a form of being mindful, but not the only one. Because at its heart and its core, being mindful is about taking small pockets of time each day to distress and create emotional and mental distance from the swirling demands on us. It's about finding stillness and peace in the midst of clutter and frenzy and calamity. And certainly there are multiple modes and multiple activities, and research says it's highly individualized, that for some, having a very active, robust prayer life. Others, it's about having a consistent meditation practice, or just a ritual, deep breathing, reading something that's not about work, riding a horse, reciting poetry, performing music, reflecting on beauty, or just sitting under a tree and taking in the nature around you. And it reminds me of this simple, profound story of a National Geographic photographer who had found out about this woman who had been damed by the Queen of England for her enormous, incredible knitting skills. And he went and visited her in this tiny fishing village in North Scotland. And he's sitting down for tea with this woman, and he asked her this question of, "Ma'am, when you knit, what do you think about?" And she looks at him and she goes, "Aye, laddie, when I knit, I knit."
You know, Greg, I think that's a great story. And, you know, in healthcare, we know when we go to apply the concept of mindfulness, a nurse manager, and I'm sure you have nurse managers that would agree, they'll say they don't have any time for anything like this. And so what we did at Temple was we said, okay, why don't you ask before you do something? So for example, before you just start rambling down a checklist with someone, ask if it's okay to ask a few questions. You know, when you call someone, ask if that's a good time to talk. And Greg, it reminds me of the quote that you shared from Viktor Frankl, which says, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And when you ask before you do something, you're actively creating that space.
Wow, wonderful. Of course, the habits would be incomplete without this last habit of get moving. And certainly it's about exercise, but it really is an expanded view. It's about taking the time and to be intentional and attentional with movement. And so begin the day with some form of movement. After 60 or 90 minutes of work, get up and move. Take time for lunch and move. Finish the day with movement. There's a term called the blue zones, and this term refers to those places in the world that have the highest percentage of people who are living well beyond 100 and are still living very vibrant, high-quality lives. And what these people, when you peel back what they're doing differently, their days are filled with tremendous amounts of movement. The women in Okinawa who have the highest life expectancy in the world at 93 are all gardening. They often have furniture on the floor that requires them in any given day to use their arm muscles and their leg muscles to get up and down the floor and keep that movement as a daily practice.
This concept of wellness, I think, is so important, and you have to be intentional about it. And at Temple, we've been intentional about it as well. And so we've created an experience around wellness that's highly personalized, that people can go in through one entry point and get the information that they need, information that's important to them. And so we provide a lot of different things to our employees, individual support. We have on-site workshops to promote wellness, financial well-being, as well as nutritional counseling and a variety of other programs. But we're really interested in incentivizing people around this process of wellness, and this robust reward system has really paid off for us in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and don't forget, we've got a gym on site.
We have two.
Yeah, we've got 2 gyms. In addition to what Allison was talking about, we also wanted to address at Temple some of the environmental factors that can erode our wellness for our employees. And because it's a very challenging environment, and we wanted safety to be our #1 concern. So we took a look at the way our external environment was entering into the internal environment, and we did that by way of our visitor management system. We saw an increasing trend in our visitor violence data. We had no mechanism to track or alert staff at the point of entry when we had visitor issues, and we had a lack of coordination between our nursing units and our front desk. And so what we did is we implemented a visitor management system called Passage Point. And what Passage Point does, it allows all visitors, when they present to the organization, to show a form of identification. We also now have the ability to flag any violent visitors at that point of entry. And we have an ability now to analyze all of the visitor traffic, especially on nights and weekends when we didn't have a great way to collect that information. In addition to addressing some of the visitor information, we also wanted to take a look at our traditional programs. You know, how often we recognize employees through employee appreciation days. And we started to identify the fact that we didn't have a consistent approach. And so what we did is we started to invent ways to appreciate our employees. When the Philadelphia Eagles were on their run for the Super Bowl last year, we celebrated for something like 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, we just kept finding ways to celebrate. In addition to that, we also wanted to rethink some of our traditional programs that were pointed toward our patients. And we wanted to shift those so that our employees could benefit as well. And so we have this great program, it's called the Animal Assisted Intervention Program. And what we do is we have qualified service animals come in and interact with our patients. Now we shifted that to also have these service animals interact with our staff. We partnered with local agencies for regular visits to our departments, and they round on those departments about every week. And we even organize hospital-wide petting events where we invite these service animals in for the simple purpose of interacting with our staff.
So Dwight, you have done so much in your organization and clearly a multi-pronged approach. What has been the response organization-wide to all of this?
Well, like all of you know, culture change is slow. But some of the things that we're seeing are really encouraging. We're seeing more stories being shared. Nurse managers are now showing up at their department meetings, and they're showing up and they're starting their meetings with a story, connecting people back to purpose, right? We also see more compliments being shared. More people are more willing to share some of the great things that they're seeing. And we're even seeing when people say thank you, the way that we respond to change. And so no longer are we saying no problem when someone says thank you. We've replaced that with my pleasure. So there's lots of little things along the way that have contributed to our culture change.
You know, you mentioned that changing the culture is a slow process, and despite the successful implementation of your program, what are some of the lingering challenges you feel like you still face?
So, of course, there are lingering challenges, and when we started this work, the collaborative was called Joy in the Workplace, and walking around an academic health system saying we're going to create joy in the workplace, that was a difficult pill to swallow. So we're still getting around some of the semantics around our activities. And we know that there's always going to be competing priorities. You know that there's always going to be competing priorities, and we've got to find a way to not create more work for some of the people that we're hoping that these programs will influence.
And Allison, we know that these kinds of initiatives are complex, but what kind of results have you seen?
So we are really excited about the results that we've seen. It's important, especially from a learning perspective, to be able to draw that line from the learning and development activity to the business results. And so sometimes that can be difficult. But we're so excited. Our results have been incredible. We've seen, after implementation of our strategy, we've seen 50% of reduction in employee disciplines. We've seen a 20% reduction in employee complaints about managers over the last 4 years. People will ask me, are those real numbers? How many are there? And I have to say, it's in the hundreds, really. And what that does is it frees up staff to really focus on the more strategic initiatives. And so we're really excited to see that in our organization. The other thing is, when you take a look at our turnover rate has dropped from 14.8% to 6.8%. And in this robust economy, we're really proud of those numbers. I think it's really a testament not only to our changing culture, but also to the mission of our organization. And then finally, the nurse vacancy rate, which is something we track on a regular basis. Sometimes it seems like we track it daily, but in the last 2 years alone, we were able to decrease the nurse vacancy rate from 8.4% to 1.76% in the last 2 years. So those are some of the numbers that we've been looking at. When you turn it around and you look at our engagement index, we've seen tremendous growth over the last 4 years as well. And in our regular cadence, we've seen that go in a positive direction. So from the 44th percentile to the 58th percentile, when you compare us to all academic medical centers across the nation. And then when you look at just in the Northeast urban hospitals, we've gone from the 64th percentile to the 73rd percentile. And so we're really proud of those results, and we're really excited to continue on our engagement journey.
Yeah, and Allison, as we talked about before, the employee experience will also translate to the patient experience. So we've seen a decreasing trend in some of our complaints and grievances. And even from an HCAHPS standpoint, and all of you that work on HCAHPS, you know how difficult it is to improve in HCAHPS. Well, we've started to see early indications that we're on the right path, and we're seeing some improvement in some of our patient satisfaction outcomes.
So, these are tremendous results, and thank you both for sharing. As we're wrapping up for the day, I'd like to ask each of you to offer one change our viewers could implement tomorrow in order to build resilience.
So for me, I would say celebrate success at every level, early and often.
Yeah, and for me, I would say stories, stories, stories. Go find the stories and go tell the stories that connect people back to purpose.
Wow, beautiful. And what I want to challenge everyone is to get yourself a habit of creating this upward spiral in your life each and every day. So pick one of the 7 and commit to writing it down, telling someone else about what you're going to do for the next 30 days to live and embrace and embody that habit.
So thanks to all of you for this in-depth discussion today. And I, too, have a couple of key takeaways. First and foremost, I think resilience starts with you. Don't underestimate how important you are to the resilience of others. The other takeaway for me is challenges and difficult times are actually opportunities. Being faced with some of the most difficult challenges inoculates us and impacts our ability for future resilience. And Allison, I have to say, I love the words you used. Heal people, save lives, and dispense hope. Hope begets hope. So now, before we go any further, we want to get you involved in the conversation. We may go a little past the hour, and if you can stay with us, we'll continue our discussion with you. Share with us online. Just type in your question or comment into the Ask a Question window and click Submit. So let's get to some questions that have already come in. So I do have one real fast, right? They come in quickly. Since resilience is a lifelong practice, which habits take longer to achieve than others? And then there's a second part to this question, but let's do that first. Which habits take longer to achieve than others?
Julie, my experience has been the mindfulness. Just last week, I asked an audience of 450 leaders how many of them actually engaged in a consistent mindfulness meditation practice, and either they were too exhausted, but only 3 hands went up. So I think we struggle with quieting our mind because the pace of life that we live in is a swirl.
Excellent, excellent. So the other question is, you gave us 7 habits. You know, everyone is like, how do I prioritize 7 habits? So the question is, are there 1 or 2 habits that leaders should spend more time on developing?
Well, I would say absolutely. I just echo again, the compliments have really transformed the way that our leaders see their environment. And so we did see some hesitancy when some of our leaders were asked to share a compliment with someone, but we encourage them, taste and see. You know, it feels great to get a compliment, so sometimes you're more willing to share a compliment once you've received one, but ultimately it takes someone to take that first step.
Yeah, external positivity, right? Pushing positivity out.
Yeah.
I make this joke to audiences that when a man's spouse dies, often his only friend goes with her or him. And what's sad is that too often the experience of especially men is that the path of loneliness. So I continue to be moved and motivated, inspired by that third habit to deepen my bonds with others. Because I find that when people do that and get really great at it, they're happier, they're more joyful, and people want to hang around them. And it leads to all these positive health and emotional and mental and spiritual benefits.
So we have another question. I struggle with days filled with urgent but unimportant tasks, work. How can I really focus on the things that are important? How do I sort it?
I tend to have people do the 4 quadrants. You know, what's urgent, what's important, what's not urgent, what is important, and to begin to fill those out. It doesn't take long. You sort of do it once and then you get the hang of it. But you start seeing where you spend your time. And then you have to say, for those things that I'm spending a lot of time on, my time wasters, how do I eliminate them? What are the things I'm not getting the bang for my buck, and how can I move those off my plate so I can focus on the urgent and important? So I go by that matrix all the time. We use it a lot.
Dwight, you said something yesterday about reference to what a flight attendant takes us through in the safety practices.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you have to understand that there's so much importance in keeping an eye on those details. And I think when you think about a flight attendant and you think about just how they go through each piece, even though they do it time and time again, they're focused on those details because they're life-saving details, right? And so I think it's really important that when we go through our work and we see all of our work laid out before us, we understand that there's a lot at stake, and with that understanding, I think that'll help us with some of the priorities. That's just my perspective.
Well, thank you so much. We do have a number of other questions, and we can certainly try to answer those for our guests online. We're at the end of our program, but before we go, we want to take a look at the roundtable questions we've provided for you. They're included in the handout, and these questions can keep the discussion going at your organization. In addition, if you'd like to connect with our speakers, here's their contact information. I do want to thank Greg Hebert and Dwight McBee and Allison Sacamandi for joining us on the panel today. You guys have done an incredible job. And thanks to you, our viewers, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. Do take a moment to fill out your evaluations. We use those evaluations to plan future programs in this series. And don't miss our next program on Thursday, April 18th at the same time, when we talk about strengthening patient and family engagement. Please be sure to mark your calendar. Now, from Vizient, I'm Julie Cerise, and thank you so much for watching today.